Imagine this. You're a federal agent. It's January 26, 2000. You've spent months hunting a hacker who penetrated the Pentagon's nuclear threat network, stole $1.7 million in NASA software, and forced the space agency to shut down its entire system for 21 days. You strap on a bulletproof vest. You draw your weapon. You're standing outside a house in Pinecrest, Florida, with a squad from the Department of Defense, NASA, and local police. You're expecting a sophisticated criminal operation, maybe a foreign intelligence cell, maybe an organized crime ring. You kick in the door, and sitting at the computer, still logged in, is a 15-year-old kid. His name was Jonathan James, and the story of what happened to him after that night is one of the most disturbing cautionary tales in hacking history, because the government didn't just catch him. They made an example of him, and years later, it cost him everything. Jonathan Joseph James was born on December 12, 1983, in Pinecrest, a quiet suburb in Miami-Dade County, Florida. His father, Robert, was a computer programmer. His mother was a homemaker. From the outside, just another middle-class American family. But Jonathan wasn't like other kids. He discovered his father's computer at age 6. While most children were watching cartoons, Jonathan was hypnotized by the glowing screen, the blinking cursor, the logic of the machine. By 8, he'd figured out how to bypass the parental controls his parents installed to limit his screen time. That wasn't just playing around. That was problem solving, the earliest sign of a mind that thought differently. Here's the thing about kids like Jonathan. They don't see rules the way other people do. They see systems, and every system has a flaw, a gap, a way through. By 13, he was deep into the underground world of early internet hacking. He went by the handle C0 Mrode, that's C0 Mrode, and spent nights on IRC channels where hackers traded exploits and bragged about targets. His parents tried to redirect him. They took away his computer access. Jonathan ran away from home and refused to come back until they relented. Except there was something to worry about. Jonathan had hacked into his school's network and altered his own grades, and that detail tells you everything about the psychology at work. This wasn't a kid who lacked intelligence. This was a kid addicted to the feeling of control. Every system he cracked gave him a dopamine hit, a sense of power in a world where teenagers have almost none. Psychologists call this the illusion of invincibility. It's common in adolescence, but in gifted kids it's amplified. They're smart enough to pull things off, but not mature enough to understand the consequences. Jonathan could outsmart adults, outsmart institutions, outsmart entire government networks, and every success made him believe he could never be caught. That belief was about to be tested in the most dramatic way imaginable. In the summer of 1999, Jonathan was 15 years old. School was out. Most kids his age were at the beach or playing video games. Jonathan was hunting for his next target. He started small. Well, small by his standards. He breached the networks of Bell South, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the country. Then he hit the Miami-Dade school system. These were practice runs, warm-ups. But then Jonathan found something that made his pulse race, a vulnerability in a server belonging to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA. Now, pay attention to this part. The DTRA isn't some minor government office. It's the division of the U.S. Department of Defense responsible for analyzing threats from nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. This is one of the most sensitive networks in America, and the router protecting it, a Cisco 7206 running software that hadn't been updated in years. The flaw Jonathan exploited had been patched by Cisco back in 1997. The Pentagon just never bothered to install the update. Jonathan installed a backdoor on a server in Dulles, Virginia, then deployed a custom packet sniffer, a program that silently copies every piece of data flowing through a network. Between September and October 1999, he intercepted over 3,300 emails from DTRA employees. He captured usernames and passwords for at least 10 military computers. He had access to internal communications about weapons threats to the United States. He was 15, sitting in his bedroom in Florida. But here's where it gets truly insane. Jonathan didn't stop at the Pentagon. He turned his attention to NASA, specifically the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. He breached 13 NASA computers and downloaded proprietary source code valued at approximately $1.7 million. And this wasn't just any code. This software controlled the physical environment of the International Space Station. Temperature regulation, humidity control, the life support systems that kept astronauts alive in orbit. NASA's response was swift and panicked. They shut down their entire network for 21 days to assess the damage. The shutdown alone cost an estimated $41,000. For 3 weeks, one of the world's most important space agencies was essentially paralyzed because of a teenager. Now, this is where psychology gets interesting. Jonathan wasn't trying to sell secrets. He wasn't working for a foreign government. In a later interview with PBS Frontline, he said, "I was just looking around, playing. It was fun for me and a challenge to see how far I could go." Psychologists call this intrinsic motivation. The behavior itself is the reward. He didn't want money. He wanted the feeling. And that's what makes cases like his so dangerous. You can't deter someone with threats of financial ruin when money was never the point. The motivation is psychological. It's about mastery. On the IRC channels, C0 Mrod was becoming a legend. A kid who hacked NASA. A kid inside the Pentagon. The bragging was part of the thrill, and part of his downfall. Because while Jonathan celebrated in chat rooms, DTRA security analysts noticed data anomalies in their Dulles router logs. An investigation began. The FBI initially believed they were tracking a sophisticated foreign hacking operation, possibly state-sponsored. The intrusion had been routed through proxy servers across multiple countries. It looked like the work of professionals. But Jonathan got careless. He occasionally connected directly to test his exploits, skipping the anonymity tools that had protected him. Those direct connections left a trail. And that trail led investigators straight to a residential address in Pinecrest, Florida. Meanwhile, Jonathan's confidence was crumbling at home. His parents sensed something was wrong but couldn't identify it. He spent more time at his computer, slept less, became increasingly withdrawn. This is the psychological toll of living a double life. The constant anxiety, the paranoia of discovery. Even a brilliant 15-year-old can't handle that pressure indefinitely. When federal agents finally arrived at his door on January 26, 2000, Jonathan didn't run. He didn't resist. He was a kid sitting at his desk in over his head. The game was over. The arrest sent shockwaves through both the hacking community and the federal government. Here was a 15-year-old who had single-handedly penetrated two of the most secure networks in America. The Department of Justice wanted to send a message. Jonathan was formally indicted 6 months later, on September 21, 2000. He struck a deal with U.S. Attorney Guy Lewis, pleading guilty to 2 counts of juvenile delinquency. The sentence, 7 months of house arrest, probation until age 18, mandatory letters of apology to NASA and the Department of Defense, and a complete ban on recreational computer use. For an adult, those same crimes could have carried 10 years in federal prison. Attorney General Janet Reno publicly declared the case proof that the government would get tough on juvenile cybercrime. But the story didn't end there. Jonathan violated his probation after testing positive for drugs and was taken into custody by the U.S. Marshal Service. He was flown to a federal correctional facility in Alabama, where he served 6 months. He became the first juvenile in American history to be incarcerated for hacking. The years that followed were supposed to be a fresh start. Jonathan tried to build a legitimate life, but his past followed him like a shadow. And then, in 2007, everything collapsed again. The retail giant TJX was hit by a massive data breach. Millions of customers' credit card numbers and personal information stolen. The hack was traced to a ring of cybercriminals led by Albert Gonzalez. The same crew had hit BJ's Wholesale Club, Barnes & Noble, OfficeMax, and others. It was one of the largest data breaches in history. Jonathan knew some of the hackers involved, and that was enough. The Secret Service came for him again. They raided his house, his brother's house, his girlfriend's house. They found a legally owned firearm and notes suggesting Jonathan had been considering ending his life. His father later confirmed that Jonathan had struggled with depression for years. No evidence connected Jonathan to the TJX breach, but an unnamed co-conspirator in the criminal complaint was identified only by the initials JJ, and for Jonathan that felt like a death sentence written in code. On May 18th, 2008, Jonathan James was found dead in his bathroom. He was 24 years old. He had shot himself with the same firearm the agents had found during their raid and chosen not to take. He left behind a suicide note. It read, "I honestly had nothing to do with TJX. I have no faith in the justice system. Perhaps my actions today and this letter will send a stronger message to the public. Either way, I have lost control over this situation, and this is my only way to regain control." Jonathan James's story isn't really about hacking. It's about what happens when extraordinary ability meets a system that doesn't know what to do with it. There's a concept in psychology called learned helplessness, the state where a person believes that no matter what they do, the outcome is predetermined. Jonathan experienced this. He'd served his time. He'd tried to go straight, and when the government came knocking again for something he swore he didn't do, he felt trapped in a narrative he couldn't escape. Once labeled a hacker, always a hacker. His story also raises uncomfortable questions about authority bias in prosecution. When federal investigators see a familiar name connected to a new crime, confirmation bias kicks in. They see what they expect to see. Jonathan's past made him a convenient suspect, regardless of the evidence. And there's the deeper tragedy. Jonathan had the kind of talent that, in a different context, could have made him one of the greatest cybersecurity professionals in the world. He found vulnerabilities that professional security teams missed for years. But in 1999, there was no pathway for a teenage hacker to become a legitimate security researcher. There were no bug bounty programs, no ethical hacking certifications marketed to kids. There was only punishment. So here's the question that haunts this entire story. If someone had offered Jonathan James a legitimate outlet for his abilities when he was 13, would he still be alive today? What do you think? Was Jonathan a criminal, a genius, or a kid who never got the guidance he needed? Drop your answer in the comments.